Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Thanks for coming out tonight. We're really excited to present this webinar to you. My name's Kenneth. I'm the campaigns officer for Child Health and Nutrition here. And
I'm Neha, and I do the parliamentary work here at Results Canada.
Great. So I'm just going to share our screen here so we can show you our presentation. Hopefully, that way you're not looking at us for the entire thing. Great. So thanks for everyone coming tonight. We're doing our Beyond the Ballot webinar, which is just a bit of a description on how you can take action after the election. We're really excited to run this this webinar, because we think that we have a really unique and interesting opportunity to teach you all a little bit about how you can get engaged and take action after the election. I think there's a bit of a myth in the public that elections are everything that matters in Canadian politics, and that's not true. And we're hopefully going to teach you how to engage beyond that. So before we get started, just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is going to be entirely in English. It's going to be going for about an hour long. We're going to be wrapping up at 9, and it is being recorded. We aren't going to be recording the Q&A, but the rest of it will be recorded so we can share it online. And we just want you all to know that. We also ask that everyone puts themselves on mute so that you don't disturb anybody else. No dog starts barking in the background or something. And then that way Neha and I can focus on presenting. Also, please feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We'll be taking questions at the end, but if you put them in the chat box, then we have access to them. So, also just want to go over who we are as Results. I know a lot of you might already know us, work with us, volunteer with us. But for those of you who don't know, we're an advocacy organization that's working to end extreme poverty in the world. We do this by trying to create the political will to create change by empowering citizens, educating people, and taking citizen action so that we can get the political change that we need. So we're going to dive right now into Neha's post-election 2019.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining, and I really want to thank everyone who also registered for this webinar. A, for your time, but B, also for your questions, because it really did kind of help me frame what we were going to be discussing today. I pretty much can tell you right now I wasn't able to get everyone's questions, but I have included my email below, so please feel free to email me anytime. You can always grab a coffee and talk about what's coming up with your organizations, or just you as a citizen, and what you really want to get into in terms of reaching out to your members of parliament. So that's just what I wanted to start off with first. So I think the first thing is obviously that the election happened. I know many of you have been working really hard during the election time in terms of, reaching out to your members or to your candidates, whether that be all different parties, organizing your volunteer base, or being a volunteer yourself. It's just, it was such a big moment for us who've been following along, but certainly a lot of the work has been leading up to now, which is what happens, now that we've, gained some new faces in Parliament, maybe lost some old friends that we've been working with for quite some time. I know many of our grassroots volunteers, we're sad to see some of their pals go and maybe not get reelected, but I just wanted to emphasize the fact that a lot of the new MPs that have started now, and we may have lost some people on the way, but I think oftentimes, especially in a minority government, we do gain some of those MPs back in 2 to 3 years. So, never lose contact, even if you made a really good relationship with a former MP, to kind of keep in touch, just because, again, you never know if they're interested in re-election again. that they might come back as your member of parliament. So don't ever feel like it's a relationship lost. It can certainly be something that's worth maintaining. And even if it's someone who's like-minded and you got along with, I mean, it's always another friend you can have and talk about politics with. So I think that's really important. So let's talk a little bit about post-election. Okay, so we're in a minority government situation, and I know some of you who may or may not know, but I wanted to just kind of briefly explain the difference between a majority government and a minority government. So in 2015, Canadians elected a majority government, a majority Liberal government. So that means that the majority of people in the House of Commons were Liberal Party members. So the benefit of having a majority government is it's very easy to pass bills to help push forward your agenda with not much complication because you have the majority of the votes. Therefore, whenever you want to push a bill through, you call for a vote and you already know that you have the numbers, so therefore the bill will usually get passed. In a minority government, it's a bit different because your opposition members outweigh the number of the government on that side. So, for example, if as a government sitting member, you may want to push a bill through, but if all of the opposition was to vote against it, it won't pass. So what the Liberal government has to do now is work with all parties to ensure that they have enough votes to be able to push their bills through. So that's a really important change from the last government to this government. So what does that mean in terms of when we're talking about advocacy and when we're talking about you as volunteers or as organizations that are working in this sphere, is that we need to work well with all parties. So if we are the ones trying to get our issues pushed through Parliament or bring our issues to the light, it's very important that we don't just stick to government messaging or to the government party, which we may have done in 2015, and really focus on how we can broaden our ways of speaking about our issues to a variety of different parties. So I think that's the first thing. We need to be able to work well with all parties. Another thing that's really important to note during a minority government is that each party's objectives are what is most important in this time for the parties themselves. So right now, considering that the balance of power is there, we really need to be reminded that each party wants to show that their main objectives are being met by a minority government situation. So if we've heard like the NDP talk about pharmacare being something really important to them, that is something that their party is going to constantly try to show that that's their main priority to get fixed. What are they doing to fix that? And so the real issue becomes, how do we get the parties to see our issue as one of their main objectives? That's ultimately the goal, because we know that the objectives is where they're going to show their leadership as a leader of the party that gets things done. So we really want to be able to influence their objectives. And we do that in a variety of ways, which I can get into a little bit later. But that's ultimately one thing we also need to keep in mind as well when we're talking about a minority government. Also, another thing with a minority government is that public opinion is everything, and that we need to show strength in numbers. So again, being that it's a minority situation, a lot of parties will be very nervous about bad media or bad press or someone saying something negatively about an issue that maybe they're talking about. So this is really the time where they want to show their, showing that they're leading, that they're taking control of their files, and that they're able to do really great work, despite the fact that it might be a difficult political situation. So this is where I would emphasize that op-eds and LTEs are really important and impactful, because it will grab the attention of the parties to make sure that, they're hearing more about Canadian aid, or they're hearing more about immunizations, and that, the sector or volunteers feel that this is something that the government and or political parties are not taking seriously. And it will play a factor into making sure that they don't want to be seen in a bad light, especially when they know that an election could be around the corner or in the next 2 to 3 years. So I think it's really important now to kind of rally the troops, get your volunteers together, get a bunch of friends to take action. I think this is like the time to do it, to take real leadership as people, as citizen advocates, as people who are engaged in the files, to really push our agenda forward. So although it can be a bit tricky at times, but I think it's a really great opportunity for us to kind of seize the moment and be able to lead the way. So just going a little bit more into working with all parties. I know some of the questions you guys were having, and I'm hoping to get to some of those questions in this presentation, but so how do I cater messaging to different parties? And I think a lot of this is kind of more of an art than a science, to be honest. But some things that I personally do when I think about how we cater different messaging to different parties, because we've already explained the importance of why, is to be doing some of the historical homework. So looking back to what the parties have previously done or haven't done. It's really talking about their legacy, whether or not we know about like the Conservatives have traditionally focused on X issue, or the NDP have always placed this issue in their party platform, or whatever it is. You do a little bit of that homework to kind of see what traditionally they've done. Because I think for a lot of new MPs, they may not know the political history of their party on a particular issue. So I think coming to them well briefed, and even the ones who've been around a long time will often resonate with the issues you're talking about because they were there during the conversations of some of these things. So bringing that historical context, I think, is pretty important when you're thinking about different messaging ways. Also look at the words that they're using. So I just wrote down here, like, read the party platforms that they had, whether it be this past election or the election before, but it's just really seeing what was consistent, especially, for example, with the Trudeau government. You might want to look at how he wrote his international development policy platform in 2015 versus 2019 and compare and see what's remained, what's changed, because that will also help kind of dictate how we may want to talk about some of our issues moving forward. Mandate letters, which I'll get into a little bit more later as well, but that's also a great indication of where the government wishes to see their minister take forward a particular issue or file. So you'll be able to, again, get more clear, concise direction of where they're going, and again, how we can point out what's missing in the mandate letter and use the opposition members to be able to help navigate those issues, but also how we can help the government party to ensure that those objectives are being met throughout, the next 2 to 3 years. So I think that's another great way we can kind of get some good language speaking within their own language, I guess. And we also have the speech from the throne, which is happening December 5th. Again, get your, thinking about what words they're using, what words they're not using, what angles are they talking about? Are they really focusing on women and girls? Are they really focusing on education? Like, what is it that seems to be the crux of what that they're focusing on? And how can that play into the work that we're doing as a lens? And then just another important point to mention is that don't assume that everyone thinks like the leader of a party. So just because a party person or maybe someone high up in a particular party feels one way about something, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of their caucus feels that way, or that it's not something that can change their mind. Oftentimes, politicians may say something for a particular reason or a particular point, or there's something advantageous they feel at the time. That doesn't mean that they can't go back to maybe rethinking that decision. Oftentimes that's happened. And also, like, again, like, not every caucus agrees with their party leader on every single issue. There's been times, just even for me working on Parliament Hill for several years, it's not that common for them to agree on every single issue. So don't feel like it's a waste of time to talk to a particular party because the party leader has come out and said something negatively about your issue. I think there's ways to discuss, and I think there's certainly conversations being had anyway, so you might as well be part of those conversations. Another good question I found people were asking were, how valuable are senators? And I think this is a good question often we have in the office as well. But we really try to think about senators as a really good opportunity for various reasons. So we know that every bill must be passed through the Senate anyway. So the Senate can really often make good amendments to bills that maybe have passed through the House. If we really feel like something was missing in something, we can absolutely ask them to make amendments to that. Also, senators are around a lot longer than MPs. So MPs, we know, have to go through an election process. Senators are appointed and they do tend to stick around a long time. So you're not dealing with the overturn as much as you are with MPs. So it's kind of more of a strategic plan, I guess, if you're trying to think about it in terms of putting your efforts and energy in that. And then also, it's just practical things for those of sector people that are joining on. It's like also they can book rooms for you. They're able to publish materials on their websites or whatever, and then help you work with coordinating with other senators or even parliamentarians in general. So often caucuses require, a senator to be involved in your caucus as well. So I think there's some really good linkages there and some really good opportunities for sure that I think is worth exploring. So I would recommend that. And then we also have standing committees. So these are the parliamentary formal committees that are expected of MPs to attend and participate in. It's a little bit different with a minority government because, similar to in the House, previously, let's say in the 2015 Parliament, it was majority Liberal members that were able to push things along, whether it's their studies. But now with the minority government, again, it's going to be more of a conversation where the Liberals don't have as many members, so they have to work with each other to be able to bring their studies forward. And beyond just bringing their own studies, you can have people come as witnesses, so you can go there and talk to the committee directly on a particular issue. So that's another great way of engaging with them. But you have to work with all parties again. It's not just as simple as, you know, you can just push your way along through. You have to really be able to work with all parties and be able to make your point clearly to see how advantageous it is for Canadians in general and why they care about these issues. So that's another really important point we have to say. And yeah, the other parties just have more power because of that. So working with the Bloc, working with NDP, working with Greens, or even working with the Conservatives, it's really important that we try to keep that conversation open and flowing, because of course it's just a numbers game really in some respect, and we have to be able to make our arguments for all parties. So today was a big day. I mean, I'm sure many of you were following along, or at least refreshing the news pages, but the Prime Minister has made his appointments for ministers. And I really wanted to kind of get into a little bit of just a general understanding of who they are and which ones we're focusing on for the purposes of our work at Results. But I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that and what we should be looking for when we're doing a little bit of a deeper dive into these ministers and or MPs in general, just as a good practice. So which ministers matter to us and why do I need to know about them? I mean, again, I think it's pretty safe to assume that ministers are the ones that ultimately create the direction in which they want to take a file going forward. So yes, they get a mandate letter like we talked about from the Prime Minister expressing what it is that he expects of you in the file, but also that the ministers are able to pull from things that they feel is also missing and are able to do while meeting other objectives. So there's still some level of influence there that we're all able to do as part of a sector or part of volunteers or grassroots, is that we're able to influence them. And so it's really important that we keep a good relationship with them, but while keeping them honest and true and being able to influence where we think that the gap is there. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Minister for International Development, Karina Gould, followed by Maryam Monsef, Bill Morneau, and John Wilkinson, and I'll get into that a little bit right now. So we have the Minister of International Development, as of today, is Karina Gould from Burlington, Ontario. And I just think it's really important to mention where these ministers are from, because if you have volunteers or if you yourself are from this area, it's a great way to connect with the minister directly, because you are a voter or a constituent in that area. And it's really great to have those connections right now, or even if you have like local newspaper connections, again, it's great to have like an op-ed in the Burlington local newspaper, because that is what the minister will be following as well, or MPs in that area. And it's obviously, if it's connected closer to home, all the better. So I just think it's really important when you're looking up any MP or a minister to see what file they're working on and also where they're from. So what we know about Karina Gould is that between December 2015 and January 2017, she was the Parliamentary Secretary to Development and La Francophonie before she was switched over to democratic institutions as a minister. So the good thing with her is that she's not necessarily straight, you know, coming out of left field with this file. I think it's something that she obviously was quite happy with for some time as ParlSec, and my even understanding just from insider chat has been that, you know, this was something that she really connected with, that she took a lot of pride in, and that she's happy to take forward. So I think this was a really good signal, not only from her as taking this on, but also from the Liberal Party in general. I do feel like this is kind of hopefully a step forward in terms of pushing the agenda forward when we talk about Canadian aid, among many other issues like immunizations. So I think hopefully with this positive relationship kind of moving forward, we can be able to kind of start in high gear, considering that she has taken on a bit of this portfolio before. So hopefully it's just a matter of brushing her up on some of what the current changes have been and where we can go from there. So I think that's positive. So before her election, she worked as trade and investment specialist, Mexican Trade Commission. So again, some of these things when we're looking at, I just put in her general bio, but I think it's just important to note where we might see some kind of common threads here. So for example, she's an advocate for women's issues and affordable housing. So again, when we're talking about that messaging, if we're going to message something to her, obviously we want to see something about how women are affected by it, because it seems to be something that's close to her. And just with affordable housing, it seems like she's talking more about the middle to lower class and just talking about poverty in general and how this is a cycle of poverty. So I think there's some really good entry points in which will resonate for her, just given her experience. So I think she will be a really interesting asset, and I encourage all of you to at least congratulate her on social media, but also to try to work with her in her office about getting some really great work done. So next we have the Honorable Maryam Monsef. So she is now the Minister for Women and Gender Equality, and she was also our former Minister for International Development from Peterborough, Ontario. So what's really important for her as well is that, of course, she has worked on the file for some time as well. It's always great to know who our friends are around the cabinet table, and I think she is no different. I think the fact that we highlighted her as an important person to kind of note is that status of women is such an important role, not only just at home, but abroad as well. And the fact that she's done this file as well is a double kind of whammy for us, that she's already switched on to the development file. So I think there's going to be some really interesting kind of touch points between her and Karina and how they can work together to make sure that we are doing the best we can as a country to help the world in a better place. So I think that's really interesting as well. Some important things for you to notice about Monsef's background as well is that she did some representation work, I think, at the United Nations Commission for Status of Women. So again, women being the main center of a lot of her work, but also talking about she's done some work with immigrants, refugees, newcomers. So again, more of a friendly face around the table. So I think it'll be really interesting to work with her in a different capacity, but I think her just having that deeper understanding and knowledge of our work will make it that much easier to influence. So of course, we have the Honorable Bill Morneau. He's our Minister of Finance from Toronto Centre. So again, an obvious reason why it's really important to be working with this minister specifically is that he's the one in charge of all the purse strings in Parliament. So we want to make sure that we get in good with him, of course. He also, just as a flag, has increased aid for over the past 4 years, including an additional $2.7 billion to AIE till 2024. Now we know that's not actually as much as we need, but at least we know that there's a positive signal that even throughout a lot of financial decisions that he has made development somewhat of an issue. So it's just a matter of, again, how can we make it that much better, working with him a little bit closer to be able to push those dollars out. So that's really important as well. He's done a lot of work in the health space. I think that's really good for us, at least at Results, who work a lot on global health. I think him just having understanding of health institutions in general would be very interesting for him to learn. And then also he's done some work in a refugee camp. So again, I think a little bit more switched on to the international side of things. What's really also interesting is that there's an associate minister now. So this is new as of this morning, but is Mona Fortier, who actually Results met with a couple months ago, and she seems quite keen on the development file as well. So again, hopefully with her assistance, helping in some of those decisions, and with Morneau kind of already kind of leaning towards that, hopefully there's some play in there for us to kind of work towards getting an increase. And then lastly, we have the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson. So he's the Minister for Environment and Climate Change from North Vancouver. Very new portfolio for him, but I think he'll be really interesting to watch. But of course, I think as climate change and environment are such important factors, especially in this past election and in the months moving forward, it's going to be crucial that we try to address our issues around climate change. And I know this is something that our grassroots are quite passionate about. So thinking about, again, how do your issues affect climate change or environment, I think is pretty much going to be the issue for a lot of ministries, no matter what ministry you're in. It's going to be an angle that they all need to think about. And I think even just for us as advocates, we need to really think about how climate change is impacting the work we do. So I think that's first and foremost what we really need to start working on. But I think he will be a very interesting minister to work with in terms of how we can make that local to global, as we know that climate change is not just a Canadian problem, it's a world problem. So I think there could be something in that. So that's just a brief rundown of everyone that we thought were kind of practical and high level and important for now, but certainly able to talk more about others if you guys are interested. So what to look out for the next few weeks. These are just kind of quick little things. I know we don't have them right now because it takes some time, but there's a mandate letter. So we have the link here for you, and this presentation will be circulated, so feel free to use these links. But so the mandate letter, again, helps kind of give you an understanding that the Prime Minister's direction for the minister. So it'll give you an idea of what it is that Karina Gould will be expected to perform, I guess, and be able to produce as an outcome for her objectives for this file. So it'll be really telling for us to hear how that's framed and what's said in that to be able to influence where we go from there. So what is the role of the parliamentary secretary? We have parliamentary secretaries are not named yet, but the role of essentially the parliamentary secretary is basically the understudy for the minister. So when the minister is out traveling or the minister is talking with constituents like yourselves, that the parliamentary secretary is in Ottawa able to speak on certain motions or bills if needed in the House. So they also do member statements and they also travel as well. So it's pretty much, and also have often been future ministers in the making. So I think parliamentary secretaries are always kind of like the secret sauce, as I always say, for Parliament, because oftentimes everyone's always trying to go for the ministers. So the parliamentary secretary is always a good option to meet with because they do brief and often have weekly meetings with their minister on what's been going on. So I think it's really important as well to know them. So that's the link to figure out who they are. They haven't announced it yet, but I think in the coming weeks, you should be able to know who they're going to be. Because again, those are going to be people you're going to want to target. So committees, we talked a little bit about how they do change with a minority government. So really, we just want to make sure we understand who are the members, who would be sitting on certain committees, and obviously the chairs of those committees, because then you may want to introduce yourself to the chair and to the members, and potentially offer to speak to the committee, whether that's be in the formal capacity of the actual meeting or an informal capacity if it's going to be like your organization hosts a lunch, or Results Canada may host a lunch and invite the members just in an informal capacity to hear about what we're working on or what we're doing. Depending. For us at Results Canada, we focus a lot with the Foreign Affairs and International Development Standing Committee. So I put that link there just for those of you who are interested to be able to figure out who these new people will be. And then again, another touch point for you to figure out how to engage with them. These are going to be a whole new slate of MPs that may or may not know about development, but it's a great way for you to introduce yourself and be able to brief them on the issues that matter to you. And then also on that website too, it tells you all the other committees that you might be interested in, depending on the work you do. And then lastly, we have parliamentary associations. So this is the list. Again, that link will link you to the whole list of the official and formal parliamentary associations. So like, for example, for Results, the Canada-Africa Parliamentary Association is a great group of MPs that get together that will run eventually to be like chair, vice president, or whatever, to be able to talk about issues that affect Canada and Africa. There's also informal ones such as Canada-India, which exist. But again, seeing how your work fit into some of these different types of parliamentary associations is another great way of getting your material out there to different members of parliament for those based in Ottawa. And just to get a different grasp of different people and getting a better understanding of what MPs want to know, what they're talking about. So these are the ones that we kind of focus on, but again, feel free to go through the list and figure out what works for you. But this is what we deem to be really great work because they're already meeting. So it's not like you're trying to come up with how to fill up an empty room with a bunch of parliamentarians. They're already meeting up. So it's nice for you to fit into already their agenda and be able to have some of those conversations. So that's just a suggestion. And so just to get like quickly some fire off questions that are frequently asked of me are some of the questions that you guys have had. So here's just my thoughts and general ideas of what's going on. So we have, how useful is it to hold a day on the Hill? It really comes down to capacity. I mean, if you feel like you have enough capacity to be able to set up a bunch of meetings, or maybe you're just really strategic and think about maybe 4 or 5 meetings, I think it can be very useful. If you have a clear ask of what you want and a clear direction for the MPs to take once you've met with them, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. It's just a matter of taking the time to plan and obviously understanding that MP schedules change a lot. Another thing with a minority government is that there always tends to be a lot of votes or things that are coming up that are politically just drama. So you may want to be a little bit more flexible in terms of timing, but I think it's still a pretty useful tool. And in fact, Results Canada is going to be doing a day on the Hill sometime in early May that goes with our national conference. So look out and stay tuned for that. I'm sure we will talk a little bit more about that later. How to maintain and follow up with MPs to stay relevant. So really, again, if you're talking about your own MP, you can pretty much be as direct or indirect as you want because they're basically owed you that time to at least sit with them and talk to them and follow up. But if you're talking about MPs in general, I mean, it's always good to kind of touch base only if you really have something to ask. At least that's my personal opinion. I don't tend to bother them too much unless I have a reason to. Or I mostly just keep in touch with their staff. So I think that's a really big thing for me if you're just thinking of a more of a casual relationship where it's like you're able to just keep in touch or keep that relationship going. I usually just grab a coffee with someone or like just try to keep in touch that way. But I don't necessarily go to the MP all the time with just random chit chat. So I just try to keep it to if there's anything that they need to do, and they will remember you, of course, if you spend the time with them and really try to engage with them. So I think there's nothing to worry about. How do you get an MP's attention? I mean, personally, I always think MPs are really vocal on social media or have been paying attention. A lot of leaders have people that monitor their social media. So I think a big thing is using your voice, using your advocacy. I mean, Results is really big on this as well. Like post, use our hashtag, and you can also tag us, and we're happy to amplify as well, because the more people that amplify your message, the more they'll take notice of what you're saying. So I think it's about obviously being respectful, but also being, you know, true to yourself and being able to speak your truth on an issue. So I think that's really important. So personally, I would just go with social media in terms of getting their attention or bringing an issue forward. And we actually have some previous webinars on how to do that with MPs. So I encourage you guys to go on the website and take a look. This question was about MPs versus staff. And I assume that it's something to do with if we want to meet with MPs versus their staff. And I've always said that I feel like even if your MP is busy, it's always important to at least take the meeting with the staff member, because as a former staff member, oftentimes a lot of the MPs just really ask us to brief them and ask us if it's worth their time to do. So if you take your time with the staff person and you sit with them and you say, this is kind of where I'm coming from, I would like the MP to do this, this is why, I really hope you can do this for me, and they really genuinely feel like this makes sense, they will say, I think it's really important that you do this. They're asking you to sign this letter, they're asking you to retweet this, they're asking you to sit down and have coffee with the minister. Like then, you know, they will follow up. So I think it's just as important. I wouldn't just write it off as it's only the MP that you're willing to meet with. So I would encourage that. And then another question we had was, how long should I wait before approaching my MP to ask about an increase to ODA/Canadian aid? And I put climate change in there as well, just because I know that was another question people were asking. And for like ODA and Canadian aid or climate change, these are all kind of things that always kind of come back, you know, to the essence of everything that we do. So I think when we talk about when's the best time, honestly, you are entitled to talk to your MP at any point. If you feel like, especially now with the MPs not being in Ottawa, at least not till the 5th, so let's say we just take out that week, but the following weeks after that, they're in your riding. So that seems like a good time more than any to grab them while they're in the riding, to be able to say, hey, I want to talk about aid, I want to talk about ODA and whatever's going on, or even climate change and how climate change is affecting that. It's not so much just about in and of itself, but how it's thread through other things that we do as well, and why it matters and how it links to other things. So I would encourage you to do it sooner rather than later, because I mean, things get crazy once Parliament starts kicking up again, they're back and forth. It gets a bit overwhelming, especially for if your MP is new to Parliament. So while they're kind of down during this, I think they come back at the end of January, I would really encourage you during the beginning of January to near the end to really do some outreach and introduce yourself and really talk about the issues that matter to you the most. So if you have any questions, I know there were so many more. I'm so sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but there is my email. Again, I'm happy to sit with any of you, or Skype or Zoom or whatever it is that works for you. Happy to discuss more. If you want to see more about this work that we do as Results with MPs, feel free to look at our MP Year in Review. We do this every year, and it kind of just talks about all the highlights of MP work we've done around international development. And then we also have the election toolkit. I know it's kind of old because the election's over, but there's some really good key messages, especially for those who are interested on climate change. That's all in that document as well. So I encourage you to go in there and really rummage through and see if you can find some good gems, because I know that there's a lot of people that felt that that was very useful. So again, for the climate change messaging, it is in the election toolkit. That's it for me. I'm going to pass it off to Kenneth. So we'll take questions in the end, but feel free to write in the chat box.
Great. Thanks, Neha. That was really great, really informative as always. So For the next little part of the webinar, we're going to be discussing what, as you move forward with this new government, how you can think about and design campaigns and advocacy work for this new parliament. We're going to be using the example of one of the campaigns we're working on right now, which is VaccinesWork, to kind of give you a framing and understanding of how what some of this work can look like. So, what is VaccinesWork? And just so you guys understand and have context for it, this is a campaign we're running. It's a multi-month campaign, so we're going to be running it over a number of months going forward, trying to secure 2 funding asks for global vaccine programs through Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which is a really important organization that aims at vaccinating children around the world in the world's poorest countries, and the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, also called GPEI, which is an initiative that's trying to eradicate polio, which, if they are successful in doing so, means it would be the 2nd disease we've ever been able to eradicate. So these organizations are really important, and we're trying to secure funding for them. So how do we do that? Well, when we're approaching this problem, we look at the components of a campaign and what you need to bring together to actually try to create change with your decision makers, change with your parliamentarians, with the government in general. And really the way we try to think of our campaigns is we break them down sort of like this. There's an issue, an ask, you have tactics, and you have messaging. You have to understand how each 4 of these come together, and that'll inform you on how you're going to move forward cohesively. So starting with the issue, what you need to do here is you need to understand the exact problem you are trying to solve. This point's particularly important because it results, for example, we're always trying to work on ending extreme poverty, and something we work on quite frequently is health. But those are not exact problems. They're not specific enough to run campaigns on in themselves. So we try to focus on, like, okay, what is one thing we can work on? What is one problem we can try to solve through our advocacy work to create change? And so that's why we come up with something like the fact that not enough children around the world are receiving vaccinations. That's impacting their health in the long run, and that's like putting them in positions of extreme poverty. What is the solution that is required to solve your problem? So once you've actually taken the time to really parse out what the exact problem you're trying to solve, try to think of the solution that matches that exact problem. You can kind of see here where it would start to make sense when that you need to be really good with deciding on your problem, and then you can find your solution. And then the third question you need to answer, and this is one I think that not a lot of people consider, is why does your problem need to be solved now? So obviously there are a lot of problems in the world, and it'd be great if we were going to be able to solve all of them. But we have to think about this question of immediacy. So why is your problem the most important, or not maybe the most important? Why is your problem worth working on now? Why is it worth taking action from the government when the government has so many other problems they can be dealing with? So when we think about the VaccinesWork campaign, this is how we're trying to break this down for ourselves. So the problem we're facing is that 1.5 million children die each year due to vaccine-preventable diseases, and 1 in 7 don't receive the vaccines that they need. So this is obviously quite a large-scale problem if 1 in 7 children around the world aren't receiving vaccines, and it's causing so many childhood deaths. That is very concrete, has very quantifiable numbers to it. The solution, as we see here, is investing in programs that try to vaccinate children, especially in the poorest countries and in the most fragile contexts. Because while vaccine rates are somewhat dropping around the world, it's not 1 in 7 children in Canada don't receive vaccines, that's globally. So where do those children live? They live mostly in fragile contexts or in the world's poorest countries. So how do we invest in organizations like Gavi and the Global Polio Eradication Initiative to try and solve that need? And then when we try to think about this issue of immediacy, there's actually kind of a very real issue here that both organizations are coming up for replenishment. So every couple of years, these organizations are looking for more money to continue their programming. While that's not necessarily reason in and of itself to fund the organizations, as long as they're doing good work, you do need to make sure that they're getting the money they need to move forward. And also, but if we don't continue to invest, all the success that we've had in vaccines, which there has been a lot of success in preventing vaccine-preventable diseases, will be rolled back, because something we know about vaccines is that they only work if everyone is getting them, or the vast majority of people are getting them. If vaccination rates drop, then it's almost as if the vaccines themselves won't necessarily work. And this is something we're trying to particularly deal with, say, for polio. We're so close to eradicating this disease, but in order to actually do that, we have to make sure everyone gets the vaccine so that the disease is actually finally gone. You then need to think about an ask. So what is the 1 or 2 sentence thing that you are specifically asking for? So to do this, you need to think of who you're asking something from. So which specific decision maker or key stakeholder you want to take action. Again, the trick here is trying to work with that word specific. It's about thinking about who is actually in charge of a decision. Do you need parliament? Do you need a minister? Do you need somebody in the government on the bureaucratic level? Who is actually the person you need to change, whose mind you need to change, or you need to take action? What is the thing that you want them to do? This is something you often hear from decision makers, is they are very busy and have a lot of competing issues they're dealing with. So they ask you quite simply, what is the thing? Not, we want you to support us in ending childhood vaccines. A decision maker like parliamentarian is going to say, okay, great, I support you, but what do you want me to do? Like, what is the exact thing you want? Do you want me to send a letter? Do you want me to have a meeting, to have a discussion? Do you want me to vote in a particular way? Then you have when. So you also need to think about, like, what is the actual time frame you want this to occur? So when we think about this in the vaccines work context, we need a decision made by the Minister of International Development or somebody in cabinet, because this is a financing decision. So we need them to allocate some of their programming money towards vaccines and continue, which they have done, and they need to continue to do so. What do we need them to do? We need them to offer up an ambitious pledge, which is a financial pledge for both Gavi and GPI. That is the specific thing we need from that specific person. And then when? Over the next few months for GPI, we know that their GPI is looking for their funding to come through sometime either at the end of this year or early into next year. And Gavi is having their conference, their pledging conference in June. So that's the deadline we need for Gavi. So those, again, they're more concrete timelines that you're looking for. Once you have those, you also need to think about the tactics. So how are you going to get your ask to the decision makers, influencers, allies, and partners? So the reason this sort of comes third is it's going to be informed by the first two. So what tactics? So if you think about what you're actually asking for, what are the various tactics that you can use to get that thing? You also have to think about who you're asking something from and what tactics will have the greatest impact on those people. And then the last thing you need to think about, and this is something that tends to be forgotten by a lot of people, is what tactics are best for your strengths. So when we say your strengths here, we mean you as an individual or you as a member of an organization or a movement that is larger. Are you really good at doing meetings with members of parliament? Are you really good at taking action on social media? What are your strengths? And how does that align? How does that match your ask, and how does that match the decision makers you're trying to reach? For example, when we take VaccinesWork at results, we take sort of three main approaches to the way that we do our work. First, we do public engagement. We try to get people to engage on social media. We try to get people to write letters to the editor and op-eds. Again, we're trying to target the Minister of International Development, and we know that they as an individual will be interested in hearing what the public has to say. So that's why we do public engagement work. We also engage politicians directly. So this is the minister themselves, but also other members of parliament who work with the minister. So we might do things like a national lobby day, parliamentary receptions that are directly targeted not to the public, but to those actual politicians. And then finally, we reach out to government officials. We know that the minister is a parliamentarian and is a politician and listens to the general public, but is also a minister. They're also in charge of delivering programming for a department, and they'll be informed by the people that work in the department, the bureaucrats. So we also try to make sure we have meetings with them so we can engage them. And the last component of building your campaign is understanding your messaging. So how are you going to communicate what you're asking for? What's the language you're going to use? How are you going to focus? This is a lot of what Neha was talking about before as well. So really think about what matters to your audience. So again, your key decision maker and anybody that you're trying to reach out to in your tactics. So if when we're doing public engagement stuff, something we talk a lot about at Results is, well, how do we make sure that this is something that's understandable to the general public, that's also meaningful and empowering to the general public? You also have to think of, but that's the same, it might be different for a politician, it might be different for a government official. The next thing you have to think about is, what's your organization's voice? And this can also be your individual voice. What are the ways that you communicate? What are the for lack of a better term, what is your brand? And how is that consistent over time? And then what tactics are you using? If you are running, and we can get into this a little bit in the next slide, if you're running a hard activist campaign where you are taking to the streets and you're protesting, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have very soft language that isn't sort of, doesn't ignite people's spirit. But if you are trying to do some more internal advocacy work, you don't necessarily want to be combative and fighting with the decision makers. So you really have to think about what tactics you're using as well, and how that will impact your messaging. So again, connecting this to our VaccinesWork campaign, we try to connect. We're trying to connect the vaccines issue to some of the other issues we know are important to both the general public and to decision makers. So there's a lot, for example, there are a lot of connections between climate change and vaccines. We know that climate change is going to have all sorts of impacts around the world, but one of the things it's going to be doing is it's going to probably be drastically increasing the amount of exposure people have to vaccine preventable diseases. We know things such as cholera, for example, which is a disease that Gavi vaccinates against, is going to be highly impacted by water levels, because cholera is largely transmitted through water, for oversimplification. But those diseases are going to become much more prevalent, and that connects to climate change. We also think about gender. How do different levels of immunization rates around the world, how is that impacted by gender considerations? What are the gender barriers to people receiving vaccines? We know that gender barriers and gender plays an important role in lots of international development work, but this is also true for immunizations. When we think about tone of messaging, we also think about, this is the organizational brand. At Results, we like to be positive and personal. These are, like, among many other things, this is how we like to work as an organization. You can see this in even say the hashtag we're deciding to use. Vaccines work. Work is positive, and vaccines, we're trying to connect to personal. People understand what vaccines are. People have gotten vaccines, do get vaccines. We're trying to make sure it's connected and personal. We talk about our work as our work, the work we do. Again, trying to make sure it's personal. And then matching your tactics. So again, we talked about this advocacy versus activism. At Results, we consider ourselves an advocacy organization. We don't necessarily engage while we think activist work is important, we don't necessarily do that work. We do a lot of parliamentary work. We do a lot of letters to the editor. Our tone is different because our messaging is different. So we do have about 10 minutes left, but before we jump into questions, we're going to do something that we want to make sure we all love doing at Results all the time, and that's going to take a very quick action. You can't come to a Results webinar without taking some sort of action. So the action we're going to ask you to take now is to pull out your phones and send a tweet. So the tweet we're asking you to send here is the indented one here, that vaccines are one of the most cost-effective ways to protect people around the world, yet 1 in 7 children don't receive the basic vaccines they need. I think Canada should do more by investing in, that's GPI's Twitter handle, and then you tag the key decision makers. In this case, it's the leader of each of the parties using relevant hashtags. So if you are excited and ready to take action, please go